Nobody dared look the millionaire's wife in the eyes. At the luxurious Grand Aurora Hotel, Isabella Sterling was feared more than respected. Staff whispered her name only when she was out of earshot because one wrong word could cost them their jobs. Waiters trembled when she entered, managers changed schedules to avoid her anger, and even wealthy guests stayed silent during her explosive outbursts. Then, on one unforgettable evening, a new waitress named Grace Walker accidentally served Isabella's table. Young, kind, and completely unaware of the hotel's unwritten rules, Grace calmly apologized after a minor mistake. Instead of accepting it, Isabella stood up, slammed her glass onto the table, and loudly humiliated the waitress in front of hundreds of stunned diners. Tears filled Grace's eyes, but instead of walking away, she quietly reached into her apron, pulled out a small leather notebook, and asked one simple question that made the entire ballroom fall silent. Within minutes, everyone who had feared Isabella for years watched her confidence disappear as a hidden truth came to light. Grace Walker had spent most of her life caring for her younger brother after their parents passed away. She worked long hours, saved every dollar, and finally earned a position at the prestigious Grand Aurora Hotel, a place known for hosting celebrities, executives, and some of the country's wealthiest families. On her very first day, the staff gathered around her with anxious expressions. "If Mrs. Isabella Sterling comes in," one server whispered, "stay out of her way." Another added, "People have been fired just because she didn't like their smile." Grace nodded politely but refused to judge someone she had never met. That evening, black luxury cars lined the entrance as guests arrived for a high-profile charity gala. Among them was Isabella Sterling. Elegant in a dazzling designer gown, she entered the ballroom surrounded by photographers and socialites. Every employee instantly became tense. Grace was assigned to another section. But fate had different plans. When a senior waitress suddenly became ill, the manager reluctantly asked Grace to serve Isabella's table. She took a deep breath and approached with confidence. Everything went smoothly until a guest beside Isabella unexpectedly bumped the table, causing a glass of sparkling water to spill onto the tablecloth. Although it wasn't Grace's fault, Isabella stood up in outrage. "You call this professional service?" she shouted. The music stopped. Hundreds of guests turned to watch. "You people should be grateful you're allowed to work here." Grace apologized sincerely and offered to replace everything immediately. Instead of calming down, Isabella continued insulting her. "You'll never belong in places like this." Some employees lowered their heads. Others silently prayed Grace would simply walk away. Instead, Grace remained composed. She reached into her apron and removed a small notebook. Looking directly at Isabella, she asked gently, "Mrs. Sterling, before I leave, may I ask you one question?" The ballroom became completely silent. Grace opened the notebook. Years earlier, while volunteering at a community shelter, she had kept a journal of people who had helped families in need. One page contained the name of a woman who had anonymously funded food, school supplies, and emergency housing for dozens of struggling families, including Grace and her younger brother after their parents died. Grace looked at Isabella. "Were you the anonymous donor known only as IS?" Isabella's expression changed instantly. Her eyes filled with surprise. She quietly nodded. Grace smiled through tears. "Then, thank you." The crowd was confused. Grace continued. "My brother and I survived because someone paid our rent when we had nowhere to go. Someone covered my school fees so I could finish my education. I spent years trying to discover who that person was." She held up the notebook. "The initials matched yours." The room fell silent for a different reason. Grace spoke softly. I don't know what pain you've carried or why you've become so guarded. But the woman who changed our lives forever can't truly be the cruel person everyone believes she is. For the first time in years, Isabella's confident mask broke. She admitted that after the loss of her only child, she had buried herself in work and charity, but grief slowly turned into bitterness. Publicly, she had become demanding and distant, believing that keeping everyone at arm's length would protect her from more heartbreak. Hearing Grace's words forced her to confront the person she had become. Right there in front of the guests and staff, Isabella apologized to Grace, and to the hotel employees she had mistreated over the years. The ballroom, expecting another dramatic confrontation, instead witnessed something far more powerful: genuine accountability. In the months that followed, Isabella quietly changed. She treated staff with respect, met regularly with the hotel's employees to hear their concerns, and expanded her charitable work by creating scholarships for hospitality students who faced financial hardship. Grace was promoted for her professionalism and compassion, not because she had embarrassed someone powerful, but because she had chosen honesty over anger and dignity over revenge. Years later, when people spoke about the unforgettable charity gala, they didn't remember the spilled glass. They remembered the night one calm waitress reminded a wealthy woman of the kindness she had once shown, and inspired her to become that person again. Sometimes the strongest way to expose someone isn't by destroying their reputation. Sometimes it's by revealing the goodness they've forgotten still exists within themselves.